Steve Harvey has built an entire career on knowing when to laugh. He has the gift, rare, genuine, and impossible to fake, of finding the human comedy in almost any situation. He has turned awkward answers into cultural moments, made nervous contestants feel at ease with a single look, and kept millions of viewers coming back week after week simply because watching him enjoy himself is one of the most infectious things on television. So when Steve Harvey stops laughing, you notice. When the smile leaves his face and something harder and quieter takes its place, the entire room changes with it. The audience goes still. The production crew exchanges glances, because Steve Harvey not laughing is not a neutral thing. It means something has happened that he has decided cannot be allowed to pass without a response. On a Tuesday evening in the winter of 2023, in a packed studio in front of a live audience, a husband said something to his wife that made Steve Harvey stop laughing for the rest of the taping. What followed was not rehearsed, not scripted, and not something the producers had anticipated. It was a man with a platform choosing to use it exactly the way a platform is supposed to be used, to stand up for someone who deserved better than what they were receiving. Millions of people watched it happen. Most of them had seen something like it before, not on television, in their own homes, at their own tables, in the quiet spaces of their own lives, and that recognition was what made the moment land the way it did. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person in authority can do is simply refuse to pretend that something unacceptable is acceptable. Her name was Patricia Holloway, 57 years old, a woman who moved through life with the particular quiet efficiency of someone who had learned early that the world rewards competence and rarely rewards loudness. Patricia had grown up in rural Georgia, the eldest daughter of a Baptist minister and a schoolteacher. Her childhood had been shaped by two competing forces: her father's insistence on moral clarity, on knowing the difference between right and wrong and being willing to act on it, and her mother's equally strong conviction that a person's worth was demonstrated through what they built, not what they said. Patricia had absorbed both lessons completely. She was direct without being abrasive, principled without being self-righteous, and she had a way of making people feel genuinely seen that was not a social strategy, but simply who she was. She had spent 31 years as a high school English teacher, not at a prestigious private school, but at a public school in a mid-sized city where the classrooms were crowded and the resources were limited, and the students were, in many cases, the first people in their families who were seriously considering college. Patricia had sent hundreds of them there. She had written recommendation letters at midnight. She had bought supplies with her own money when the department budget ran short. She had stayed after school on Fridays and come in early on Mondays and done the invisible, endless, unremarkable work that good teachers do and that most people only notice when it stops. Her husband, Gerald, was a regional sales manager for a manufacturing company. He was 6 years older than Patricia, a large, self-assured man who had been successful enough in his career to develop the mild arrogance that can accompany professional success when it goes unexamined for too long. He was not a bad man. He was a man who had gradually stopped working very hard at being good to his wife, partly because it had not seemed to cost him anything, and partly because Patricia, who had been quietly absorbing the costs, had never made it visible enough to demand attention. Their three adult children, Marcus, Renee, and their youngest, Darnell, had applied for Family Feud as a birthday gift to their mother. Patricia was turning 58 in 2 months, HS, and they had wanted to do something she would remember. She had loved the show since she was a girl. She and her mother used to watch it together on weekday afternoons. And there was something in the idea of standing on that stage, in that context, that connected her to a part of herself that predated every responsibility she had ever taken on. She had arrived at the studio with her children and with Gerald, who had come because not coming would have looked worse than coming, and because, to his credit, he understood at some level that this day belonged to his wife and her children, and that his role in it was simply to be present and supportive. He had managed that for approximately 40 minutes before he stopped managing it. The Holloways were good at this. It became apparent within the first few minutes of the main game that this was a family that communicated quickly, laughed easily, and operated with the kind of low-friction collective intelligence that develops. In households where people have always genuinely liked each other, Marcus set up answers that Renee completed. Darnell, who had his mother's gift for reading a room, worked the audience into genuine enthusiasm with a response that was equal parts unexpected and completely correct. Patricia anchored it all. She was calm under the studio lights, focused and unhurried. answering with the measured precision of a woman long practiced in performing clearly in front of an audience that needed. To be clear, the Holloways built a lead through the main game that was comfortable but not comfortable enough to be careless about. When they moved into fast money, the mood on their side of the stage was confident, without being overconfident. Gerald went first. He was visibly energized by the crowd's response to his family's performance. Relaxed, expansive, enjoying himself. His fast money round was solid through the first two questions, then lost its footing on the third and fourth before recovering on the fifth. He finished with 138 points. It meant Patricia needed 62 points to win the $20,000 for the family. 62 points was achievable. It was not a layup, but for a woman who spent her professional life making complex ideas accessible to teenagers under pressure, it was well within reach. Patricia stepped to the podium. She was wearing a deep blue dress that her daughter Renee had helped her pick out. She touched the small gold cross she always wore, her mother's passed down on the occasion of Patricia's ordination as a deacon at their church, and placed her hands on the podium. Steve Harvey looked at her with the warm, genuine attentiveness he gives every contestant who stands in that spot. He opened his mouth to begin the round. Gerald's voice came from off to the side. He had not been taken backstage yet. He was still in position, waiting for the floor crew to direct him. And in the moment before Patricia's fast money round began, he said, at full conversational volume, with the ease of a man who did not think twice before speaking. Don't overthink it. You always overthink everything. That's your problem. The floor director heard it. The front two rows of the audience heard it. Steve Harvey, standing 8 feet away, heard every word. Patricia did not look at her husband. She looked straight ahead, her jaw tightened by the smallest degree, the kind of involuntary physical response that the body produces when it is absorbing something it has absorbed many times before. Her children heard it too. Renee, standing at the family podium, closed her eyes briefly. Marcus looked at the floor. Darnell, the youngest, looked directly at his father with an expression that said he was 24 years old and had heard this his entire life and was very tired of it. Steve Harvey was no longer smiling. He turned his head slowly and looked at Gerald. It was not an angry look. It was something more controlled than anger, and because of that, more powerful. It was the look of a man who has made a decision. He turned back to Patricia. Hold on 1 second, he said. His voice was level and completely even. He walked to where Gerald was standing. He did not call attention to himself as he moved. He simply moved, with the unhurried certainty of a man who knows exactly what he is about to do. He stopped in front of Gerald and said, quietly enough that the audience had to strain to hear him, "You're going to do me a favor. You're going to stand right here and you're not going to say another word to her until this round is done. Can you do that for me?" Gerald, for once, said nothing. Steve held the look for one additional beat, the kind of beat that communicates that this is not a request anyone is expected to debate, and then walked back to the center of the stage. He turned to Patricia. The smile came back, but it was different now, quieter, more personal. The smile of a man offering something specific to someone who needs it. "Patricia," he said, "this round is yours. Take your—" Patricia looked at him. Something in her face shifted, a tension releasing that had been held for much longer than the last 60 seconds. She took one slow breath. She nodded. The clock started. She answered all 5 questions with the unhurried, methodical clarity of a woman who had spent 3 decades teaching other people that thinking carefully was never a problem, regardless of what anyone else had told them. By the 4th answer, she had 71 points. The family had won. The 5th answer brought the studio to its feet. The 5th question Steve Harvey asked was, "Name something a great teacher gives their students that no textbook can." Patricia smiled. A real one, private and sudden, the kind that appears when a question lands exactly where you live. "Belief," she said. The board turned. Number 1 answer, 43 points. Final score, 114 points. Family total, 252. The Holloways had won the $20,000 by a margin that was not even close. The audience was on its feet before the number finished appearing. Steve Harvey let the celebration run for a long moment. He embraced Patricia, shook hands with the children, let the room be joyful. And then, when the applause had settled into something sustainable, he turned to face the whole studio family, audience, cameras, and he said what he had been waiting to say. "I want to tell everybody something because I think it matters." His voice carried the particular weight it carries when he has put down the performance and picked up the truth. This woman just answered 5 questions under pressure and won her family $20,000. She did it calmly. She did it thoughtfully, and she did it with exactly as much time as she needed. Not too fast, not too slow, right on time. He paused, and before she did it, somebody standing very close to her told her that thinking too much was her problem. The audience went quiet. Now, I'm not going to embarrass anybody, Steve said. That is not what we are doing here. But I am going to say something directly. Because this is my show, and this woman is a guest in my house, and in my house. Guests are treated with dignity. He looked at Gerald, who was now standing with the family, and the look was not unkind, but it was utterly clear. When the person next to you is about to do something hard, when they are about to stand up in front of everyone and give everything they have, your job is one thing only. You lift them up. You do not add to what they are already carrying. You do not tell them their way of thinking is wrong right before they have to use it. You stand behind them, and you believe in them, and you keep your doubts to yourself. Because your doubts are yours, not theirs, and they do not belong in that moment. He let that settle. This woman is a teacher. 31 years. Do you understand what that means? He addressed the audience now, inclusive, drawing everyone in. That means for 31 years, has walked into a room full of young people who the world had not yet decided to believe in. And she gave them belief, anyway. She gave it to them out of her own supply. She made it possible for them to think that they could do hard things. He turned back to Patricia. And the answer she just gave, belief, that was not a lucky guess. That was her telling you who she is. Patricia was crying by now. Not collapsing, not breaking. Just the steady, quiet tears of a woman who has been accurately seen by a stranger after a very long time of being inaccurately described by someone close to her. Renee had her arm around her mother. Marcus and Darnell stood close. The four of them formed a unit that needed no commentary. Gerald Holloway stood slightly to the side. His expression had moved through several stages in the last 3 minutes. Initial defensiveness, then a careful neutrality, and now something harder to name. Something that looked, if you watched closely, like a man doing the uncomfortable arithmetic of his own behavior and not particularly liking the result. Steve addressed him one final time, directly, without theater. You have a remarkable wife. She just proved it in front of everybody. The question is whether you go home tonight and you tell her that not because the cameras were here, because it is true and she deserves to hear it. Gerald looked at Patricia. You were incredible, he said. His voice was quieter than usual. I'm sorry. I should have said that before you went up there instead of... He stopped. I'm sorry. Patricia looked at her husband for a long moment. Then she reached over and took his hand. Not dramatically. Simply, the way people who have a long history together reach for each other, when the history includes things worth holding on to. The audience applauded one final time, and it felt like something real. The clip traveled fast. Within 6 hours of airing, it had been viewed over 8 million times. Within 48 hours, it had been covered by 12 major media outlets, not as a celebrity story, but as something closer to a cultural conversation about the invisible weight that capable women carry, about the specific damage of being doubted by the people who are supposed to believe in you most, and about what it looks like when someone with influence chooses to name a dynamic that most people have witnessed but rarely heard, addressed so plainly. Teachers, in particular, responded with something that went beyond appreciation. A high school teacher in Philadelphia posted a response video from her classroom. Empty, after hours in which she sat at her desk and simply said, "This is what we need people to understand. We give belief away every day. We run on fumes and we give it away anyway. And then we go home and sometimes the people there take what is left." The video was shared 300,000 times. A retired educator in Alabama wrote a letter to the Family Feud production team. She said she had taught for 40 years, had raised 4 children, had buried a husband, and had spent the last decade feeling, in a way she could not precisely articulate, that none of it had been adequately witnessed. Watching Patricia Holloway's moment on that stage had made her feel, she wrote, finally seen by proxy. Patricia Holloway did not seek out the attention the clip brought, but she handled it with the composed, unhurried clarity that had characterized everything else she did. In a brief statement she released through her school district, which had called her almost immediately after the episode aired, wanting to celebrate her, she said, I did not go on Family Feud to make a point about anything except that my family is wonderful and we like each other very much. If something in that hour resonated with people, I am glad. Teachers spend a great deal of time giving other people's stories their full weight. It was a gift to have mine receive the same. She returned to her classroom, the Monde. After the episode aired, to find her students had decorated her door. The sign they had made read, in large letters, exactly the word she had given as her final fast money answer. Believe. She said later that she had stood in the hallway and collected herself for 2 full minutes before walking in. Steve Harvey addressed the episode during a Q&A segment at a speaking engagement several weeks after it aired. He was asked whether he had been worried about stepping in the way he did, whether there was a calculation involved, a concern about how it would be received. He said he had not thought about it at all in those terms. I just saw a woman about to do something hard, and I saw somebody making it harder for her. And I couldn't stand there and pretend I hadn't seen it. That's not a calculation. That is just the minimum of what you owe people. He said the thing that stayed with him was not the confrontation, but what came after. Patricia's fifth answer. She said belief. And I thought, this woman has been pouring belief into other people's children for 31 years. She walked up to that podium and gave me the exact word that describes what she has built her entire life around. That's not a coincidence. That's a person who is completely aligned with who they are. He paused. The saddest thing in the world is when someone like that goes home every night to someone who has stopped seeing it. Gerald Holloway was not absent from the aftermath. According to the family, he had reached out to a counselor within 2 weeks of the episode, which his son Darnold described in a brief social media post as a long time coming, but better than never. The family had not asked for public sympathy or condemnation for Gerald, and they received neither. What they received, instead, was an outpouring of recognition from other families who saw their own dynamics mirrored in the story and found, in the Holloway's willingness to stay in the room together, a kind of permission to do the same. Patricia Holloway retired from teaching at the end of that school year. At her retirement ceremony, the principal read aloud a letter from a former student, a woman now in her 40s, who had been in Patricia's junior English class 30 years earlier, who had been the first person in her family to graduate from college, and who attributed the beginning of believing that was possible directly to one particular conversation with Mistress Holloway. After school, one October afternoon in 1994, the letter ended. You gave me belief before I had any of my own. I have been spending it ever since, and I have never run out, because what you gave me was not a quantity. It was a practice. You taught me how to do it for myself. Patricia stood at the podium at the front of the gymnasium and looked out at 3 decades of colleagues and students and parents, and did not try to hold herself together. She had done enough of that. In the audience, in a row of folding chairs near the back, Gerald Holloway sat next to his 3 children. He was applauding, and if the expression on his face was not simple happiness, if it was something more complicated, more aware, weighted with things he was still working through, that was perhaps exactly as it should be. Some lessons arrive gently. Others arrive on national television, in front of 200 strangers and millions of viewers, at the precise moment when you least expect them, and most need them. The Holloways took theirs home. They did the work. That, in the end, is what matters most. Not the moment itself, but what people choose to do with it afterward.